ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste my dear friends, this is second video on Ramana Gita. This starts with question 6 of chapter 2. Verse 8. If one practicing yoga for fulfilling a desire becomes a steadfast knower of the self, will that desire be fulfilled or not? Commentary. It is said that self-abidance destroys all desires. If that be so, the question arises as to what would be the fate of the particular desire for the satisfaction of which the spiritual practice was commenced. The doubt is if it would also be washed away. Question Answers to question 5 and 6, verse 17. Even though the practice of absorption of the mind in the heart is begun for fulfilling a desire, that desire also will certainly fructify. Verse 18. While practicing yoga with a desire, if one becomes a person of steady wisdom, even though the desire is fulfilled, there would be no elation. Commentary. These are the answers to fifth and sixth questions. The single-minded pursuit of certain spiritual practices might be for the fulfillment of a particular desire, say wife, children, wealth, etc. The single-mindedness brought about by such motivation might result in the absorption of the mind in the heart. The doubt was about the pre-existing desire. Ramana's reply is clear that desire too would be satisfied. It is no doubt true that the desire too would fructify, but for the one who had sarried it, it would no longer produce any happiness. Why, free from desires born of attachments, all events, good and bad, would be seen neutrally with neither depression nor elation. Note: Sri Natarajan includes in his Ramana Gita the Sanskrit version in Bhagwan Ramana's own handwriting at the beginning of each chapter. These were made available by Sri V. Ganeshan. You can see these in the Ramana Gita folder under Photos Krishna Bhiksu Translation. Verse 1 in the Chaturmasyal of 1915 of the era of the Son of God, Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi uttered in a verse the essence of his teaching. End of chapter 1. The importance of self-abidance. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The three paths. Hridaya Kuhera Madhye. The Eka Sloka in the interior of the heart cave. Brahma alone shines in the form of the Atman with direct immediacy as I enter into the heart with questing mind, or by diving deep within, or through control of breath and abide in the Atman. Verse 3. Whoever understands this verse, the essence of Vedanta uttered by Bhagwan Maharshi, will never again be assailed by doubt. Sri T.V. Kapali Shastriyar's commentary on the Eka Sloka chapter 2 verse 2 of the Ramana Gita. First, here is the story. Bhagwan's own account as told to Suri Nagamma of how the Eka Sloka came to be written in 1915. Jagdisha was staying in Skandasram during Chaturmasya, and one day he wrote down in a piece of paper, Hridaya Madhe, held it in his hand and sat down. When I asked him what it was, he said he wanted to write a sloka, but when he actually began it, only that much he could write. I asked him to complete the rest. He said that nothing was coming forth and thereafter just left the paper under my seat. Though I reminded him any number of times, he pleaded his inability. One day he left for some place before his return. I completed the sloka, wrote below that as Jagdishan, and showed it to him as soon as he returned. Those days he was very young. He said, is it not Bhagwan who completed it? Why is it written as Jagdishan? I said, I don't know that. Was it not Jagdishan who completed it? Then saying, if it was written by Jagdishan, please give me the paper. He took it away and preserved it with him. Suri Nagamma, to whom this account was given, wanted to have from Bhagwan in an explicit manner what was as usual with him in such matters, left implicit. She records that she asked him further about this sloka. Bhagwan himself is Jagdishwara, is it not so? Bhagwan just replied evasively, that is all right, and proceeded to divert the subject by a narration as to how the sloka ultimately came to be incorporated in Ramana Gita. Thus, Bhagwan had left us in no doubt that the prompting and the product was that of Lord of Universe, Jagdisha Sri Ramana himself. Another important thing about this sloka is that it is the first composition of Bhagwan in Sanskrit. Earlier his compositions were in Tamil. When Kavya Kantha Ganpati Muni, the great Sanskrit scholar, saw this sloka, he was beside himself in joy and proclaimed it as Ramana Upanishad, Hriday Upanishad. He decided to write out an exhaustive commentary on it. When in 1916 a reference was made about this in the presence of Bhagwan, Kavya Kantha said, the time for that is yet to come. I shall compose something like Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, as a commentary. That was how Ramana Gita itself was born. Here now is the verse itself, followed by Kapali Shastriya's remarks taken from his commentary on the 40 verses. 15. In the interior of the heart cave, Brahma alone shines in the form of the Atman with direct immediacy as I enter into the heart with the questing mind, or by diving deep within, or by control of breath and abide in the Atman. Just as one forgets all other thoughts and keeps aside all other cares, and holding breath and speech gets into the well and plunges deep to find the last article. Even so, one has to forget for the moment all his responsibilities and cares and take a deep plunge into the deeper truth of himself, holding calm his breath and mind, which would otherwise dissipate his energy and divide his interest. Thus he gets into a moment of plunge, that deepening and deepening with a vigilant and discerning eye develops into a supreme awareness. The methods here hitherto suggested, that is in the 40 verses, are all some sort of search with the mind, and indeed they yield results of their own, and the earnestness of the search determines the measure of success. But in this verse, the method called plunge is suggested, and this is the real test of earnestness. For an honest, wholehearted attempt involves the gathering up of one's divided interests and dissipated energy into a concentrated effort of the whole man of his being in all its entirety. It is not a partial attempt by the mind or by means of controlling the life breath. Here, restraint of breath and speech are suggested as a means and an accompanying condition of the plunge. Restraint of speech suggests a mind equipped for the attempt and preliminary calm. Restraint of breath also is spoken of here both as a means and as a necessary condition. It is easy to see that it naturally accompanies a serious attempt of this kind. But how is it a means? The discipline of regulating the breath has a value to life breath as it clears away to a certain extent the impurities that are the heritage of a life that is divided in its interest. Beside the discipline of regulating the breath, pranayama gives a certain purity to life in the body and thereby helps the mind to have control over itself by getting clear of the arrogating advances of life upon it. An impure and weak mind is a slave of life which is ever out for satisfaction of appetite, hunger and thirst, and is full of desire for enjoyment of sensual objects. The sadhana by which prana is purified goes a long way to purify and elevate the mind. It must be noted that what is enjoined here is the adoption of any means that will enable one to take a determined dive to find the real in the deep. Though the Maharshi's attitude to sadhana may be summed up in one word, Nishtha, steadfast abidance leading to or realized in Prapatti, self-surrender to the Lord in the knowledge of one's own helplessness. He has no predilection to any of the stereotyped yogas, for instance, the Gyan Yoga of Neti, not this, or the Bhakti Yoga with its 8 limbs of Sarvana, Kirtana, etc., or the Raj Yoga that aims solely at the mind becoming entrance into a state undisturbed by the world. The Vichara or quest is described as quest for self by the claim collected and deepening mind. When the mind becomes calm, free from all thoughts other than the single thought of the self, and begins to search for it in silence, then alone real quest for the self vichara may be said to begin. As in a well of water deep, dive deep with reason, cleaving sharp with speech, mind, and breath restrained. Exploring, thus mayst thou discover the real source of ego self. Kapali Shastriyar translation. Note this sloka is repeated in verse 8 of the supplement to the 40 verses and is engraved in gold letters on black basalt above Ramana's couch in the new hall. There is also a commentary published by Ramanasram by C. Sudarshanam in pamphlet form, A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 1 in the rainy season of 1915. Bhagwan Ramana Rishi stated the essence of his teaching in a verse. Verse 2 in the center of the heart cave Brahma shines alone. It is the form of self experienced directly as I enter the heart through self inquiry or merging or by breath control and become rooted as that. Commentary. There are 300 verses in Ramana Gita. Of these, this verse only was composed by the Maharshi himself, although the other verses composed by the Muni also set out only the teachings. This verse has a special significance, for great importance has to be attached to the words of seers as they express their direct vision of the truth. It is also the first composition of Ramana in Sanskrit. In 1915, Jagdishwara Shastri, an ardent and scholarly devotee, wrote the first few words of this work. Here they are. Kuhura Made in the center of the heart cave, but could not proceed further. However much be tried, after some futile attempts, he went out, leaving the paper under Ramana's seat. Before he returned, Ramana himself had completed the verse. Letters from Sri Ramanasramam by Suri Nagamma, page 341. Ganapati Mun regards this verse as containing the essence of Ramana's teachings, hence gives it pride of place through an exclusive chapter. Note that heart, Brahma, Atma and self are used interchangeable by Ramana. However, use of expression heart is most common seen. Based on his own experience, Ramana locates it 2 digits to right of center of chest. It is at once the seat of the self and the source of the ego. The individuality scriptures declare Brahma shines in hearts of all creation, pure, eternal, and self luminous. Ramana describes how consciousness shines forth by itself, spontaneously taking form of an unbroken feeling of I, a continuous throb of consciousness, I. The expression Brahma alone indicates absence of duality. In Upadesasram, Ramana explains true import of individuality is the heart, since it shines always without a let, whereas the I thought or ego we take to be self is only a phenomenon of the waking state. The ego perishes as it were daily in deep sleep, and logically one cannot be that which comes and goes. It must be the heart which sparkles always, because there can be no break in one's being. Though feeling of fullness as I is continuous even when one has notion of separateness, awareness of this feeling would be absent. When through conscious effort the I thought is traced to its source and merged there, one becomes conscious of the continuous sparkle of the heart. In 40 verses on reality, Ramana makes it clear that consciousness of the I is different from the ego or the idea of individuality. Ego is limited, separative, and particular. The feeling of I is the limitless expanse of consciousness. The I thought ego is termed Aham Vritti, and the shining of the I in the heart is called Aham Spurti. Ramana described the latter as an incessant flash of I consciousness. You can be aware of it, feel it, hear it, sense it. When questioned by Kapali Shastri as to how to feel in this in the body, Ramana explained that the whole body becomes a mere power, a force current. Life becomes a needle drawn to a huge mass of magnet, and as you go deeper and deeper, you become a mere center, and then not even that, for you become mere consciousness. Sat Darshanam Bhasha. Ramana's translation of this verse into Tamil and Malayalam in the supplement to 40 verses needed to be noted. The English translation of this read as follows: In the interior of a hard cavern, Brahma shines as I as the self. Resort to the heart by diving deep within through self-inquiry, or by subsiding the mind along the breath. You will become established in the heart. On plain reading, it would appear that two alternatives are suggested: that of merging through self-inquiry or merging through breath control. The alternatives are suggested since the mind and breath have a common source, the heart. Ramana has explained in Upadesa Sarm that they are two branches of the same tree, Sakti, power. Here again the two paths indicated would be more for practice. The second alternative is more in the nature of an aid to the first, the subsidence of the mind. Supplement to 40 verses, verse 8, Upadesa Saram, verse 12. To blow up the controversy whether the paths are three, two, or one is to miss the wood for the trees. It is important to remember that the point which Ramana is emphasizing is that direct experience is possible and that one should somehow enter the heart, for which the suggestions mentioned would be complementary in practice. The self inquiry suggested is not to be pursued weakly but the total interest, diving deep like a pearl diver exploring the ocean bed for pearls, or like one trying to recover something which has fallen into water. The mind has to be gathered completely at its root, the I thought. Regarding breath control, it may be mentioned that in the Ramana way, the emphasis is not on hatha yogic practices of controlling breath, which involves time and need expert guidance. Instead, the mind is used for watching the breath. On such watching, the breath would be regulated. Further, it is to be noted that though it would appear from a literal reading that Ramana gives the same position to breath control as for self inquiry, it is not really so. On a reading of his views on mind control in this work and from his replies to the doubts of seekers, it would be clear that Ramana regarded breath regulation only as a temporary aid for self inquiry itself, for it would serve as a break to the ceaseless though flow which prevents total attention to the I thought. Another reason why Ramana does not recommend breath regulation as an independent means is because such regulation often produces temporary stillness of the mind. This would leave the problem of ego or thought of separateness untackled. It is only through conscious effort, through self inquiry, that the subsidence of the mind at the source takes place. Verse 3, whoever understands this verse uttered by Bhagwan Maharshi containing the essence of Vedanta will never again be assailed by doubts at any time. Commentary. The Muni is in raptures over the preceding verse, for seekers of truth have been given a simple and direct way to self-abidance. The verse's authoritative nature springs from its being the words of Ramana, one abiding firmly in the state of steady wisdom. Doubts will come to an end, for a path has been indicated, the reading of which leads to direct experience of truth for oneself. The three ways. Krishna Bhiksu translation. In the first half of verse 2, Bhagwan has indicated the location of the self in the physical body of the five elements. In the same place, the characteristics of the self one stated and any form of dualism negatived. Its direct and immediate cognizability is affirmed, which contradicts the various characteristics of the Supreme adumbrated by the dualist. In the second half, instructions in the pursuit of spiritual practice are given to the disciples by the path, apparently threefold but in essence one. The first part is termed Margana or research or search. The second is Majjana, diving in. The third is Prana Rodha, control of the flow of life force. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 4. In the first half of the verse, Bhagwan has indicated the location of the self within this visible body formed of five elements. This ends the chapter 2. Thank you for watching this video. Namaskar, my dear friend. Thank you.